The ravens had grown restless before the wind did. They shifted in their wicker cages as if they too could smell the old, unspeaking presence that climbed the pine-dark slopes of the Fist and hollowed the air under the stars. Samwell Tarly listened to their feathers whisper and felt the murmur inside his chest match their sound. A soft and unending fret. It was easier to attend to birds than to men, easier to fuss with knots and grain, and the little Jessies braided from horsehair, than to meet the eyes of rangers who watched him as though his shadow might trip them. He kept his hands moving, because hands that moved were hands that did not shake. He had meant to dig that day, meant to answer a small tug in him when Ghost had lifted his head, ears pricking, and padded to the old snow-choked ring where the stones made a windless hollow. He had stood a long while in the lee of the ring, the crust of ice breaking beneath his boots with a sound like glass cracked by cold, and told himself that if he only scraped the top layer away, he might find a reason for the dog-like attention in the dire-wolf eyes. But the light died fast in the far north, and Dewin laughed that strange barked laugh of his and told Sam to stop mooning about. The old bear wanted messages read again for mistakes, and Pip asked him for the 100th time if ravens truly loved cheese as much as the song said. In the doing of small things, the larger ones slid away. Sam had decided he would return in the morning with a shovel. There was no morning of the sort he knew. The dark became a glass in which the world froze, and the stars took on the thin, watching sharpness of distant spear points. He never got the shovel. The old bear's voice became a horn, and the horn became a scream, and the scream took on legs and ran down into the snow-packed gullies where men had their throats filled with silence. When the dead came, the ravens leapt so wildly in their cages that the wicker creaked like timbers at sea. Sam fumbled the gate, and they broke upon the night like letters of a language he would never read. He saw them vanish into the cold. Later he would try to recall their black disorder as auspice, but memory refused to shape itself to meaning. He did not see the first of the blue eyes in the trees. He heard only the small sounds that men make when they harden fear into purpose. The throat clearing and the hawk spit, the scuff of a boot settling to a stance, and then those sounds were all unmade at once as if a hand had clapped them flat. The world's breath drew in. The air grew light as paper, and so thin. Sam thought of candles snuffed within a glass, the little exhausted cough they gave when they died. He ran. He ran long past the moment his body swore it could not, long past the utterance of his father's voice, "No son of mine," into the marrow of his bones. He ran until the sound of his own heart frightened him more than the crackle of ice in the trees. In the throbbing blackness between firs, he remembered the shovel he had not taken up, and the unbroken snow, and the way Ghost had watched, and some pattern tried to form and died again beneath the weight of his breath. Later, when the men who lived gathered what pieces of themselves they could carry and shouldered them toward the promise of a roof, Sam had his small miracle. Gilly's eyes found him and did not hate him for living. Her gaze seemed always wider in winter, as though the cold pulled the lids taut and the blue within took on a glacial depth. She held the bundle at her breast with a ferocity that turned her thin arms to iron and said, "He has a name," as if asking what the sky was called. "Not yet," Sam panted. "Not yet." They moved through a darkness so complete it could not be night. It was a substance, a low roof under which men walked bent. Snow fell soundless, the flakes large and floating, changing the shapes of the world as they took hold. Beside him, Gren carried a man whose name Sam did not know. The blood from the man's shoulder painting Gren's cloak into a standard that would freeze in folds by morning. Pip rambled, a bright scatter of talk laid out in front of them like breadcrumbs he did not want to eat himself. "It's nothing," he said. "We'll see light again, and then we can laugh at how we ran. There'll be a story. There's always a story, Sam. Isn't there? Tell me a story in which the cold is only a trick and the trees were never full of eyes." Sam didn't tell stories. Stories were arranged, and nothing in him could be arranged. He clutched the thong of the satchel where he kept his letters and wax and quills as though paper had become armor. They reached Craster's keep by the grace of a cruelty that wanted witness, and the low stockade appeared under their hands. Its posts rhymed white, the heads on the spikes wearing caps of soft snow that made them seem absurdly festive, as if winter had put hats on its sins. Craster was famine in fur. He looked at men as if they were ravens, a nuisance that would eat what he could not eat himself. The old bear's eyes were a worry on the verge of turning hard. He made his bargains the way he took his tea, scalding, and the result was a night under a roof that smoked and a meat that tasted like it had remembered being alive too well. Sam sat near the door with Gilly and the tiny heat of her infant folded into the wool, and did not close his eyes. When he tried, he saw snow being cut with quiet blue knives. He had promised himself he would dig in the morning if they made it to morning. He would find the place where Ghost had waited and read the ground as he read ink, and he would have an answer that made sense. But the morning belonged to a sour stew, and the scrape of boots, and the way men looked at the rafters and thought of having them on their backs forever. The old bear put out orders as if he were buying a thing with coin and could not be cheated. They would leave soon. They would rise early and leave this place behind them like a dream that clung. And while men shouldered and cursed and bound their minor wounds, while Gilly vanished into the shadows beyond Craster's glare, Sam's half-made plan withered under the attention of tasks. He carried bundles. He checked the ties on the sledge. He fed the ravens what stale oats remained. He told himself there would be another morning. That night, Gilly's child coughed, a dry little sound like a splinter turning in wood. Gilly shifted him to her other breast and watched Sam with a look that asked things he could not give. "You talked to me once," she said, "about a gate underground, a gate that knows your words. There are old ways." Sam murmured, embarrassed at the sound of his voice. "The night fort has the black gate. It will give passage to brothers who speak the oath. If the roads are too watched." Gilly's eyes flicked to the doorway where shadows cut the smoke like bars. "Old man gives boys to the wood." She whispered, "I seen the place. I seen the white in the trees. I seen men go walking into it and never turn their heads. If it's a gate that knows the truth of a man, I'll never be let through." Nah. Sam tried to protest, but the word truth broke apart in his mouth. He looked down at the child in her arms and saw how his little mouth had taken on a faint blue tinge. Not a bruise, not yet. Simply the color the cold had when it kissed. He wanted to reach out and touch the boy's cheek, and found that his hand stayed where it was, a heavy thing on his knee. The night creaked and settled like an old ship. Somewhere outside, men laughed too loudly, and then were silent too fast. Sam listened and felt the wind pause and tilt, a small change. He did not know why it made him want to put his hand across Gilly's mouth. The door was only a hide over a dark, and it moved when the cold pushed. At first he thought it had opened to let in a man's shadow, for there was a man's height and a man's breadth to the shape that came in. But it did not move like a man. The fire warped, bowing away from it. The air turned thin again, and the little blue color on the child's mouth deepened to the color of sky before dawn. The shape wore winter like a garment and brought with it a music so soft that Sam thought it must be the memory of bells. He had no blade that mattered. His knife might as well have been a spoon. He snatched for the brand in the hearth and lifted it as if he were a storybook hero who had dreamed this very moment. But the flame shivered, made small, and the brand shed its fire like a snake shedding a skin. The fire fell away. The black stick in his hand felt wet from the melted marrow of heat. The walker's eyes were blue in a way that seemed content in their own meaning. They did not burn. They regarded. There were delicate things in the cold, lace on panes, starry patterns in a horse's breath, a hair's frost along a wool cuff, and those things belonged to this gaze. The walker came forward as if the floor had been made to meet its step. Gilly turned and turned again, and found no place in the hut that was not the walker's. She made a sound too small to live and clutched the child closer. Sam held up the dead brand and heard himself say no with a voice he had never used before. A child's voice, the voice he had thought burned away in Horn Hill with the last of his boyhood. The walker looked at him the way the sea looks at a stone, briefly, not unkindly, with an old patience that did not admit plea. Then it reached out a hand so white that it seemed to have been grown under snow, and laid it upon the child's brow as gently as a mother. The blue deepened. The small face went still. The child did not cry. He did not fuss. It seemed that fuss had been a dream that could not be recalled now that wakefulness had become so clear. Gilly's mouth opened around a word that had been meant for the boy and came out as nothing at all. Her arms softened, and the child slipped, and the walker took him with a hospitality that mocked the worst of men's work. It cradled him the way one cradles peace. It looked at Sam once more, that cool, complete look, and the winter around it sighed, and then it was not in the hut. It had not gone through the door. It had simply not been there. Sam was left with the brand, his hand around the dark stick like a hand around a bone. He felt the shape of the world change the way one feels the weight of a coin change when it is gone from a purse. Subtraction more real than possession. The air had weight again, but it lay wrong, as if all its meanings had been shifted to new places that would take time to learn. Gilly did not scream. She made a sound of breaking that had no air in it. Then she began to say no in a soft, repeated way that made the word an old roof letting in rain. She pressed her face into the straw on the floor and set it there too, feeding the floor with it, and set it into Sam's cloak when he reached for her, and set it into the corners of the hut where spiders had spun their winters and would keep them. Her weeping had a blunt, unadorned quality, as if her tears knew the work and its end and were only getting on with it. He had always thought of himself as tender. He had believed that tenderness made a kind of strength when it had a duty, that it could be braced against like a post set well in the ground. He discovered then that tenderness could be only the body's urging to flee its own heart. He wanted to be out from under the roof, and away from the sound of Gilly's loss, and out into the black, where the cold had no words. In the morning, there was a morning after all that made him hate its light. Rumor took the keep before men did. Craster was hunched and sly and terrible. His daughters moved like smoke between his moods and the walls. Someone said he had been seen walking the snow beyond the fence with a bundle in his arms last night, singing under his breath. Someone else said he had danced. The men of the watch did not see Sam, or if they did, they saw only a shape that had lost the part that spoke. The old bear's face, when Sam found it, was as tired as the bottom of an old cup. It showed the world only what clung. Sam did not speak of blue eyes and hands like intricate frost, and the way the fire crept away. He said only that the child was gone, and that the cold had gone with it. He did not say, "I failed." Gilly would not look at him. The old bear pushed breath through his nose and said they would move by noon, that nothing good came of wintering under the roof of a man who had made winter his god. The mutiny the songs do not sing of had already begun in the mouths of men. It lived in the words cheap and always, and it slipped a little blade between honor and hunger, and found where honor bled. It would flower later, blood-gorged and noisy. For now it lay along the tables like a long shadow as they ate, and Sam listened without hearing until Pipe's hand touched his wrist. "You're..." "Sam," Pip said, struggling with the uselessness of what came next. He was only a baby. "Ha," Sam repeated, and heard the word as if it had come from a place further away than Dragonstone. He looked over Pipe's shoulder, and for an instant, perhaps the last kind of mercy he would be granted, he thought he saw a single raven perched in the gaping mouth of a rafter, head cocked, watching him. It could have been any bird, but Sam named it in his heart as one of his. He felt his hands again. He rose. He did not dig. He had no shovel and no time. He wrapped paper in wax and wrote on it with a hand that surprised him with its steadiness. He wrote the old bear's words in a tighter script and sent ravens that did not want to be sent. He told himself that words were also a kind of blade, that they could cut new meanings into the world if only they were sharpened well. He did not believe it. He wrote anyway, and watched black letters become black wings and pull away from him. They left that day, and the sky waited for them with its vast, indifferent blue. The snow, having done its work in depth and shadow, wore a glaze now, as if it had put on a face to greet their leaving. The company moved, and the ground moved beneath them, in a slow exchange of hostilities. The cold had hands. It placed them tenderly on the backs of their necks and pressed. When the fight within the keep broke open at last, It did so as if it had never been other than inevitable. The old man bled where he had not thought he could, and the old bear died among men who had sworn to die around him, rather than before him. Sam was nowhere in the first blows. He did not know what to do with a world that had taken shape around the word oath, and now threw the word to dogs. He was here when the blood was already on the ground, and the fire had made the air a meat smell, and he was here when Gilly ran with her hair loose, the loose hair that had always meant terror to him in women, and said his name in a voice that made the syllables useless. He put his hand on her elbow and felt the tremor that ran through her like water finding its channel. They left into a night that had more stars than other nights, as if the sky had been broken and its pieces tossed up and left to stick there. He could have gone south with the others. He could have clung to any warm body that offered itself a shield. But Gilly had the stubborn forward-leaning look of someone who has only one direction left. She spoke of the night fort as if she had seen it in a dream where walls were bones and gates had mouths. Sam realized he had told her things to make himself feel large and learned, and in telling had given her a map that did not care how small and cold she would be along it. So he went where his words had sent her. They skirted glades where snow took on a glow of its own. They passed ruins that had made a compromise with winter, and now wore it like propriety. Sam found himself naming trees under his breath. Some had trunks like clustered fingers. Others leaned together in secrets. The child was no longer in Gilly's arms. He existed now in all the empty places around them. Every root's twist was a cradle. Every hollow sounded like a lullaby if the wind found it just so. It made their path a series of refusals. Once, when the black between the trees had grown so deep that even the notion of a path seemed foolish, Sam heard bells again. Not the loud civic bells that had rung in Old Town when he was a boy and his father rode away to war. Small bells, like those a careful woman ties to a goat so she knows it is still nearby when she has too many goats and too many nights. He stopped, and Gilly stopped with him. Her breath a small stitching in the air. He almost called out. The word caught behind his teeth. The bells were not moving away or toward. They were a sound the cold made when it was pleased with itself. He took Gilly's elbow and pulled her on. The night fort appeared out of the dark. The way old shame appears in dreams, complete, unavoidable, its details precisely those the waking mind had been kind enough to refuse. Its rooflines took snow into themselves like a last adornment. The stones were asleep. The drawbridge was gone. Sam led Gilly through the gaps where guard towers had sloughed away and left rooms full of old winter. He spoke about the kitchens because it kept him from speaking about the thing under the gate. He said, "The black gate is beneath the well." And Gilly said nothing, because the well they stood beside had no bottom and made the cold smell like old iron. He felt in himself the strange clarity that comes when a thing you once named for wonder must work like a door, or you will die before dawn. He climbed down iron rungs and counted them, because numbers obeyed when nothing else did. At the bottom the dark had a taste, a mineral tang like the air in a cave where water once sang and had since gone silent. He waded in black water up to his knees and thought of fevers and baptisms and all the ways men told stories about beginnings. He reached the wall. It was a wall like no stone. It had the coolness of a living thing at rest. He put his palm to it and said the words he had said so often to himself that they had begun to mark him, faint letters pressed into soft bark. His voice down there sounded as if it had been traveling a long way to reach him. He spoke the words to the end, and then the stone opened, and he saw a mouth. It was not a man's mouth. It was a piece of the earth that had learned how to shape words, and meant to use that skill the way a hawk uses the wind. Sam repeated the oath. The mouth ate it, as if it were food it required to live. Light gathered that was not light. The way cleared. He helped Gilly through, heard her sharp breath when the wall's cold clung to her like a second skin, and then she was past it. He thought for a moment of the cruel little joy he had imagined he might feel at showing someone this secret, the satisfaction of being the one who knew. It was gone. The gate closed behind them like a hand around a candle. The world on the other side was still the world. Snow made its white assertions. Trees stood. The wind did not tire. But the feeling Sam had that everything lay a hair to the left of where it should lay deepened. He wondered if there were places in winter that could not be reached again once past, as if the world were a book, and the page could be turned, but not turned back. They made Mole's Town before the frost could take their meanings. The little burrowed streets hissed with the breath of women, and beneath all the sounds was the older sound of earth, being made to yield where it did not want to yield. The madam gave Gilly a blanket with the look of a woman who knows blankets are rarely given without a string, and was surprised when none pulled her hand back. Gilly sat and stared at her hands as if they were someone else's hands left with her to mind. When Sam touched her knuckles, she started, and then did not pull away. He had the night's watch about him again, the black that men wore in winter as a comfort and in summer as a promise. Eliezer Thorne gave him a work, and Sam did his work, and men called him the things men call a man they wish to place on a shelf and not think about. He took their insults the way one takes a stone in a boot, with a wry patience that admits pain and chooses to walk anyway. He watched the ravens return in ones and twos and fours, unequal as if the sky had played a game with them, and found it boring. He did not tell anyone what he had seen in Craster's hut. He did not know how to arrange the telling, so that it left him anything when it was done. And to whom would he speak it? To John, maybe, if John had been there, and not at the other edge of the world where men pretended they could make a bargain with the largest thing that would ever happen. He wrote John a letter anyway in which he said none of it and all of it. He asked about the half-hand with a steadiness that made his ink pool thick and round. He told John to be careful of men who thought their fear had no object, that such men put their fear into the first thing that would hold it, and that the first thing might be his back. At night, he read. He read until the letters made little beetles crawling in lines. He read old maesters who had tried to turn cold into an argument and failed, and singers who had turned old arguments into cold songs and passed. He found mention of stones that cut the breath of bad dreams, and mentions of black blades and white. And he read of Dragonstone's glass in a book that had been repaired by careful hands that had loved it. He slid his hand across the page and thought of the shovel he had not taken up. He closed his eyes and saw again the way the walker's hand had lain on the child's brow. He could have folded this into himself and let it become only his private winter. But the world did not leave him to his solitude. The wildlings pressed, and the wall became a mouth that spoke fire and stones. John returned heavy with news that did not fit in his body, and tried to shoulder it among men who had grown narrow with the particular cold of obedience and small office. The battle came like a house guest who will not take off his boots. It stamped through every room and left wet footprints. Men died where they had learned their letters, where they had first kissed, where they had made vows, and in dying made those places holy in a way that had nothing to do with septs. Sam did not distinguish himself. He put quarrels to bows and put bows into men's hands who could use them better, and found himself in corridors where the stone had gathered the history of footsteps and kept it. Once, when the bells of the lift clanged and the cage came up bright with blood and snow, he had one of those small private moments that make a life. He put a cup to Pipe's lips, and Pip, who loved the shape words made more than their meaning, said thank you with such care that it seemed as if he were teaching the word a new way to be spoken. Then he was gone, and Gren too, and the wall kept their names with the same cold patience it kept everything else. He took Gilly from Mole's Town to a place within the castle where the wind only owned half the room, and he found her a corner that was not generous, but was not cruel. She looked smaller without the child, and bigger. He had not known a person could be both. She watched men pass and put one hand on her belly as if trying to feel whether the space that had once held life had cooled entirely or kept an ember. When Sam came in with bread and words that tasted like bad bread, she took the bread and did not refuse the words. "You took me through," she said, not looking at him. "That gate. It knew you. It didn't spit you out." "It knows brothers," Sam said softly. "Not men. Brothers. It's different." She nodded as if to say, "You know how to talk about the mouth in the wall, but not about the mouth that took my son." He did not ask forgiveness. What could forgiveness be shaped like here? John became Lord Commander, the way snow becomes a field, by falling and falling until it is absurd to pretend the ground beneath remains unchanged. Men spoke about it in words that tried to be facts and kept failing into opinions. Sam heard the scrape of politics and felt little interest. He had found the part of his heart where he would not be ambitious. He gave John counsel of the small kind. One friend gives another, who cannot be protected by friendship. And he wrote letters. And one day, when the wind was so raw, you could taste it in stale bread, he found a passage in a book that had been copied 3 hands ago by a maester who had complained at the margin about the sting of oil lamps. The lines spoke of glass and a darkness taken into its making, and a property that fought the properties of winter's kings. He ran his finger under the words and laughed once, a short sound like a raven startled out of a hedge. He thought of Dragonstone and its mountain of glass, and of how the island's name, in the small mouths of children, would have sounded when they were taught it. Dragonstone. He thought, if I write this and show it, it will become a plan, and plans are a kind of weather. They can chill or warm. But I am late. I am so late. The shovel, always. He took the book to John and felt the small tilt in the room, when words become more than words. John's eyes, older than they should have been, flicked down the page and then up to Sam, with that particular lack of surprise that belongs to men who have stopped hoping to be saved and begun to hope to be accompanied. Dragonstone, John said. Of course it would be a rock that remembers fire. Obsidian, Sam whispered, tasting the old name. Dragonglass. Forged by heat and cooled so suddenly, it keeps a temper different from the world's. Joan's mouth tugged down and then up at one corner, a look he wore when he was about to put his body between an idea and a sword. We'll need more than words to chip the Night King's teeth. The title fell between them with the dry weight of a thing men had used in stories, and not yet in the world. Sam did not ask where John had learned it, or whether the men beyond the wall spoke it as a courtesy or a challenge. He did not ask, because in the world they inhabited now, names were finally doing the same work as weather and food. They were no longer luxuries. Plans began. They were slow, because boats do not build themselves and men's loyalties do not change their clothes quickly. The movement of timber to harbors and the convincing of men who smelled like fish to risk their nets for a black rock's promise took on the slog of late winter. Sam went to Gilly that night with the news bright as a candle stub, and found that he could not speak it. He stood with his palm on the stone of the keep and felt its large quiet. He tried to imagine holding out a piece of glass to the hand he had seen and having it break like light. He tried to imagine the small sound it would make when it went into icy flesh. In the imagining, he looked down and saw again the child's mouth. If he had discovered the cache on that first night, things would have arranged themselves into something cleaner. He would have had a blade already with the proof upon it in blue dust. He would have laid the knife before the old bear like an altar. And the old bear would have waited with his eyes, and men would have spoken more reverently. Sooner. Sam was not blind to the shape of that world. He saw it walking beside him like a ghost. It did not console him. He had no wish to be consoled. In dreams, the walker came not to take, but to return. It would stand in the doorway and hold out the child in arms so careful that Sam's breath hurt with the wish of it. The boy's eyes would be a gentler blue, the blue of morning over frost. And when Sam reached to take him, his hands would pass through the cold as through river water, and all he would carry away would be a painful wetness and a smell like wind. He woke from such dreams with his face wet, and his breath shallow, and the book on his chest. The script on its page were drawn by the candles, leaning smoke. He would rise and put on his cloak, and climb to the top of the wall, and stand where the wind boxed men about the ears, and told them they were little. Sometimes John would be there, and they would not speak, and that would be the most honest conversation either of them had that day. When word came later of a village on the far shores of the world where dead walked, and a man in black had stood against a thing with eyes like blue bells and had cut it with a sword that burned only with a black, sunless fire, Sam felt both the deep gratitude a man feels when his friend lives and a second sorrow. Valyrian steel had found its purpose in the world, and men turned toward it like plants toward light, And still every telling ended with the part about the dead rising like a tide and the sky turning to bone. Dragonstone mattered. It mattered in giant, slow ways that could crush a person. But the first failure had left a shape in him, and in the story that would not be smoothed entirely by any later victories. He carried that shape, the way the wall carried the shadows of old sieges. He thought sometimes of the buried cloak around which Ghost had snuffed, and of the way he had told himself there would be a morning, and then another. He began to suspect that the gods had not punished him for fear so much as instructed him in how long consequences come walking. Gilly changed quietly, the way a coastline changes in a slow sea. She had lines at the mouth that were not yet old. She folded blankets with a care that made one think of other small care she would never again give. She did not avoid him. When he brought her stories, the ones he found of kind queens with winter in their hair, and boys who had crossed a river and returned with its secret, she listened with her head tilted, not as if she invested or judged, but as if she were watching him hang something on a line to dry. Once, when he came to her with a foolish, fierce idea that he might go to Old Town to the Citadel and turn the weight of all their knowledge upon the cold, she looked at him long enough that he told her the rest of it without being asked. That he wanted to bring her where rooms had braziers and shadows, were deep for warmth. That he wanted to put her in a world where doors had rings and did not open to no one. "If it is you," she said at last. And the last word had 3 lives in it: question, resignation, blessing. "If it is you, go." He went. He went with letters and a small hope that facts could be coaxed into a shape that would be an answer. And on the road south, he found the winter's edge and stepped over it and felt the shame of relief. Old Town raised itself before him like a long thought which had taken centuries to say. The Citadel was both as grand and as ridiculous as he had dreamed. The chains at the throats of men rang like arguments every time they shifted in their chairs. He sat in rooms that smelled of vellum and oil and the tiredness of men who had never fought a battle, and wept once, quietly, for the ease of it all. Of course there were words there that mattered. Of course there were lines that did not lie. He found in a dry history an almost casual mention of Obsidian's other names and its peculiar obedience to fire's law, rather than winter's. And he held in his hand an old knife kept under glass as a curiosity that had once been cut to a shape with such loving attention that the flake scars along its edge were like a poem written with a chisel. He stood and looked at the knife and thought of a hand colder than iron, and knew as certainly as he knew how his name was spelled that this was a trade he could make with the world. Glass for fear, glass for cold, glass for the little dark blue mouth of a child. He wrote to John soberly, because the men here made style a sort of virtue, and he wanted to enlist it to his cause. He told John what he knew, and where it lay, and how quickly it could be had, if men would only agree to want it. He sent copies on birds that had never felt true winter, and watched them go. He went back to his books, and his own heart's long winter, and Gilly's last word. And he waited for the answers that would be not answers so much as the next page in a book that had grown too heavy to hold alone. In dreams, the walker did not come anymore. He dreamed instead of the place where he had meant to dig and had not. And in the dream he was always almost at it, always a little delayed by some strap that needed tightening or some raven that would not be persuaded to swallow a letter. The snow lay over the spot like a patient hand. He put his mittened fingers to it and began to scoop the powder away, and each handful revealed more snow, softer and purer and as indifferent as the first. A voice he could not place, neither his father's nor the old bear's, said mildly, "You must keep at it, Sam." And he did, and woke with damp palms in a room that smelled of oil and keels and summer far away. When the word at last reached him, of ships taking on clinking cargoes bound in straw at Dragonstow's black quays, of men bruising their hands on glass that cut without heat, of new blades being knapped by patient men, taught by older men, who had handled such rock as if they were trimming winter's nails, Sam felt a small, unbeautiful joy. It was not the joy of balm laid on wound or of dead child returned or of clean, noble redemption. It was the joy of a nail driven straight at last, after too many bent, in a house that needed a roof before the storm. It had in it a little anger, a little grief, a little laughter. He took it as one takes a small cup of brandy by an open door in wind. He went to the rookery, where summer lived a little in every feather. He handled a few black lives and told them where to go. He wrote to Gilly a letter that was too short, and then too long, and finally something that did not say what it could not say. He spoke to Meester after Meester with a politeness that attacked. He made friends the way a heavy man climbs a tall stair. Breathing, sweating, committed, because he had begun to see that knowledge, without companions, is an argument made to an empty room. Night after night, by the taxiing glow of lamps, he took the book back down from its shelf and ran his fingers under the lines that he had already read to richness. Dragonglass, obsidian, frozen fire. He imagined the first hand to pick up such a stone and to feel in it a promise shaped so blunt that even a child, even a craven, might understand. Winter can be cut. It will not thank you for it. It will only bleed blue light and retreat and gather its dignity and come again. He told himself again, in a voice that sounded more like his and less like boys' or men's voices he had collected. I am late. I will always be late for this. And still, days gathered. Letters crossed. The wall stood and did not stand, and held, and would not hold, and Sam discovered that the work of being late and yet moving was the only work left to him that felt like courage. If he began sometimes to tell a story to himself, to imagine the day when a glass blade would turn a white wrist aside, when the cold would make that small cough like a candle in a jar, when he would be able to be in the room where such a thing occurred and not drop whatever brand he held. If he imagined that day, he did so as a man tasting food while it cooked. A small lick of what must be to come. He closed his eyes on that taste and opened them on books and birds, and the next heavy breath of an old, patient winter. Some nights he walked the quays by the whispering sound and watched the water study the moon, and if the breeze turned a certain way, he thought he heard bells. Not the cold's bells. Human bells, on boats with wives aboard, the kind one hears and knows that someone has tied them in hope to something that might be lost in fog. He had not been allowed hope for a long while. He touched the chain he would one day wear, link by link, and found strange, pitying smile hidden at the corner of his mouth. That if he named this feeling hope, it did not run. It placed its hand in his and walked beside him, late, as so many things were late in this story, and adequate, in ways the story had not expected. When the first crate of obsidian's thin, deadly petals arrived at Eastwatch and men there lifted the straw, and laughed from their throats at the weight that cut them, Sam sat alone among books and did not laugh. He put his hand flat on a map and followed the line from Dragonstone up the sea, along the Bay of Seals, to the wall, and then with his finger he stepped into the haunted forest and found, without meaning to, the small ring of stones where snow had once lain unbroken, and where a dear wolf had waited and wondered at a man who would not listen to him. He touched the mark there as if he were blessing it. He said to the room, late. He said to the room, still. Out the window, the sound shouldered itself in the moonlight like a beast turning in sleep. In the rookery the birds rustled and settled. In castles of black rock, men who had never known the old names of things took glass into their hands and gave it a purpose. Winter stood beyond all this with the same interest it had given water and stone and men since the first fire was coaxed from the first cold friction. It would come. That was not in question. Whether it would leave, there Samwell Tarley set the tiniest of his heavy, careful hopes like a candle cupped in both hands and resolved, with the quiet stubbornness he had always mistaken in himself for weakness, to walk it through the wind. Yeah. Old Town taught him how many kinds of quiet there were. The rookery's was a busy quiet, wires trembling, wings rustling, a susurrus of small breaths and soft defiance. The scriptorian's was industrious, the scrape of quill on parchment like 1,000 mice gnawing through the dark. The vaults had a mineral quiet that tasted of dust and iron and old lamps. The Hightower's stones held a maritime quiet, as if every silence there had first been rinsed in salt and In such courses the days went, and Sam found that if he moved among the different quiets with intention, he could keep from hearing the one that lived under all of them. The quiet in which a snow-bent branch cracked with blue light and a small mouth went still. He learned the local bells. Every city that mattered had bells with their own grammar. Old towns told him when fishermen came upriver, when a barge found the shallows like a knee in an old bed, when the harbor watch changed, when a noble's ship took a pilot, when the faith called men to prayers that smelled of beeswax and incense, when a fire took to timber, and the bells became an argument. In the long blue hours before dawn, the high tower's beacon turned the river into black silk, with a pale seam on it, and lit gulls to scraps of torn paper. He found his way to Alarus without trying to find him. The boys' arrows made their own introductions, an apple splitting with the clean sound of a cracked teacup, a cob of bread kicked from a post, a coin in flight clipped hard enough to ring as it spun away. Alarus smiled easily with half his mouth and watched hard with the other half of his face, which made him appear always to be both listening and bored. "You move like a man reading while he walks," Alarus said one afternoon. The fletching had just plucked still in his fingers. "Sooner or later you'll walk into something that doesn't care for letters." Sam had a dozen answers, all apologies, none useful. "I've been in cities before," he said instead, as if the shape of his body did not tell its own tale. "Old Town is large with its age. The oldest places are always the biggest liars," Alarus said with cheerful malice, and loosed at a pear balanced on a novice's head 50 paces away. The pear jerked and leapt like a rabbit and hit the cobbles, thudding once. "Ask our archmaesters. They'll tell you the world does as it's told." Sam smiled despite himself. He wanted to talk about glass. He wanted to say frozen fire like a prayer, test the syllables against a living ear. He had been careful about who heard him say the words obsidian, and others under the same breath. Men here were as proud of their unbelief as other men were of their piety. He had learned to speak in proofs, not portents. "We've started," he said. 8 Dragonstone. The quarries in the old flows are being opened. There are men who remember how to flake a blade to a keen edge. Eastwatch has received the first crates. Mender Bancho. Alarus put the arrow to his bow like a man laying a brush on paint. "Good," he said simply, without the flippancy he kept beside most words. He let the arrow fly. "You think it will be enough to cut winter?" "No," Sam said. "No, I don't think anything will be enough. But I think we can make the cold pay for every step it takes." 6 nights later, the candle burned. Sam would spend years afterward trying to fix that moment in his mind, as if pinning a moth to cork. The exact instant when the green-black length of glass that had sat like a dead river on the oaken table lifted its own light and spoke with a color that was not fire. He had imagined that the room would gasp, and men would rise, and the world would declare itself altered. In truth, the leaping went unnoticed for a count of 10. A novice yawned. Archmaester Abros, his link of silver clouded, trimmed his quill. Archmaester Peristan said he would prefer the window closed if men meant to debate heat. The candle shone, the green in it like the wet green in a wave's heart, and Sam felt something in his chest lean forward, as if toward a voice calling his name from far down an empty hall. Marwyn came like a late storm that had finally broken. He had shoulders like a dock worker's, and a face weathered into skepticism by men who had tried for years to sell him small magics out of their sleeves. He looked once at the candle, and then at the men, and smiled in a way that made Sam grateful for the target not being him. "Ah," he said, "now the world can misbehave, and we no longer have the excuse that it does not touch our table." Abros sniffed. "If tallow would do as well for illumination." "It won't," Marwyn said. "We do not burn with tallow. We burn with dragons." He turned abruptly toward Sam as if catching a scent. "You are the one who writes to a boy north of the world, and to captains south of it, and to a queen he does not yet know." "I write to John," Sam said, and found that he had no better word than John. "I write where I can." "Good," Marwyn said. "Write this, that some learnings call to other learnings. Glass calls to glass. If the candles burn, the stones will answer. Turn your quarrymen's hands until their palms know how to make an edge that eats cold. The Sphinx is the riddle, not the riddler, Alaris said from the doorway with his easy half-smile. He looked at the candle unabashedly, as if gazing at a woman sunning herself in a public garden. You know that lesson, Archmaester. Marwyn snorted. I know that boys who ask clever questions believe the world is flattered by them. He lifted his broad hand and cupped the air above the candle, and then his eyes went inwards for a breath. You, Tarly, come and look and tell me what thing in you expects to see a face. Sam stepped nearer as one approaches an open grave for a friend, carefully, wincing in anticipation at a pain already sure. The glass light was not light. It was memory, almost, made visible. He tilted his head and, yes, there, like a trick he had learned as a child, and forgotten until the muscle remembered it. Depth. He would not have said he saw. He would have said he felt a place beyond the room become the room's edge and press itself like breath on the glass. In that press, there were shapes. A great white under a great dark. A black spine across a world of snow, as if a god had drawn a nail there to divide before and after. He could have named it the wall without seeing it. His body knew where north lived as a sailor's body knows where the sea is. He groped for a word, and grasping none, held his breath instead. And in that holding something like a firefly winked out there across the black, small, orange, mortal. A torch? No. A brazier? No. An ember. A room with a corner. The tilt of a narrow doorway. The high, narrow bed crowded with blankets like the pelts of animals taken in another age. In that bed, his mouth went dry, hair like dark straw. A hand on a belly out of old habit and late loss. Eyes open in the night, not because they fear a thing, but because sleep does not want them. Gilly, he said aloud helplessly. The candle's green flickered. The vision changed, as if the river had turned. For a breath he saw blue. Not eye blue. Cold blue. The music of bells without bells. A moving that took warmth out of the world with the same precision a woman draws a thread from a seam. It came along a fold in the snow with the fussy patience of a needle. Sam jerked as if struck. The room's heat fell on him like spilled soup. He swallowed. Alaris's face had the proper tightness of a boy who has watched a man's shame and will not make it worse. Marwyn's eyes had gone thoughtful. Ibros said, as if a minor syllogism had been resolved. You saw something, Marwyn said, very mild. I saw. Sam said, and then stopped, because shapes made in that glass tasted less like knowledge and more like confession. It answers, he said. The candle. It can be made to, Marwyn replied. By men with need. By men with questions. By men with other candles. If the dragons teach the candles to burn, the glass will show us, and show us to each other, and that will make honest men uncomfortable and liars industrious. He straightened. You will come to me tomorrow after the breakfast bell. Bring your letters. Bring what you call your proofs. Bring your hands. I will see what your hands know. He went away like weather changing. The other archmaesters murmured, some with disdain, others with a sort of cautious interest. Peristan unshuttered the window to let the river's breath in case the glass had moved the air in any improper fashion. Alaris stayed by the door until Sam stirred. You have a way of finding the places where the stone is thin, the boy said quietly. Be careful. Thin stone is easily broken, and sometimes it breaks in the wrong direction. Sam slept badly, poked awake by the candle's impossible green. When he did doze, he saw fireflies in ice and listened for bells he had not heard since the long dark under the trees. He kept his morning bread down by force of will, and went to Marwyn with a stack of letters under one arm, and a crate under the other full of broken glass he had purchased from a boy on the fish market quay, who had said with suspicious solemnity, "Not all glass is the same, sir," and sold him coastal obsidian shingles that the tide had flung up from some old floe. The shards cut his forearms through the rough sack. He was grateful for the pain, as if it could count towards some debt. Marwyn's chambers were full of things that would have given the other archmaesters hives. Bones and bottles. A tray of old knives laid out on a cloth like words, in a sentence of an unknown tongue. A broken idol from some summer isle god who had been humble enough to let himself go to pieces. The glass candle burned there too, steady as a vow. Marwan listened with his head cocked, like a man studying a new language not for its words, but for the places where it has no words. Sam told him what he knew and what he feared, which came to much the same thing. "It's late," Marwan said at last, not unkindly. "But the world is always late. We are born into a race already running. People will die for how I was late." Sam said. He was surprised by how flat and acceptable that sentence sounded in the room. He had been circling it for months, and now that it lay down between them like a tired hound, he did not feel as much terror as he had anticipated. "Yes," Marwan said. "But others will live for how you are late. A man who waits until he is ready has decided to leave the work to other men." He gestured toward the crate. "Let me see what your water-thrown rocks can do." They napped until Sam's fingers fountained blood. There were rhythms to the thing, and after an hour he could feel them the way a heavy man feels the rhythm of his own breath in the first mile of a long walk. The flake scars along the blade's edge were like calligraphy. They told the story of its making. Marwan knocked a thickness away with a skill that may as well have been magic, and a petal-thin, vicious piece came away shining. "This will go into a white like truth," he grunted. "But truth breaks. And so will this. Bring more truth. Put it in more hands." Memdrami Shai. Sam learned how to fit the black petals to bone, to antler, to narrow slots in wooden shafts, how to wrap sinew in glue that had once been boiling hooves. How to make little knives meant for a wildling mother's palm as well as larger quarrons for a ranger's quiver. He wrote a guide in a tidy round hand that any craftsman could follow, had copies made by a lad with ink on his cheek, and bundled them with the crates. He had a line to a Taroshi factor who liked the sound of coin more than the doctrine of Winter's unbelief. The man's ships could be persuaded to call at Driftmark and take on shaved black stones, if the price was generous and the risks discussed in a language shared by profit and fear. Patty watched him sometimes. The boy had a kind face with a dog's watchfulness in it. He asked harmless questions and made harmless jokes. He told a harmless story about a girl he had loved and lost to a kiss and a coin in the harbor fog. And perhaps because Sam himself was a man built of bruised harmlessness, he did not mind the boy's company. When Pat brought him a ledger once, "A man named Valen keeps lists of old stores from Dragonstone. They'll throw it on the fire if you don't take it now." Sam thanked him and did not notice the way Alara's eyes flicked between them for a beat. "The Sphinx is the riddle, not the Riddler," Alaras said again later, when the two of them stood in the Hightower's shadow watching a river full of boats go about their business, as if war and winter would never be anything but rumors. "Do you know why the mage says that? Because boys that look like puzzles believe themselves clever?" Sam said, smiling faintly in a bid for Alaras's ease. "Because men who ask good questions are often the questions themselves." Alaras's eye followed a gull that was following a skiff. "Be careful which answers learn you." He could not be careful enough. The ravens came like weather with their news from the north. They brought a winter-salted hand that cramped on a pen. "Send more. Send faster." They brought small triumphs, like the one that said a man named Ronald with a name like a bell had put a black petal in a thing with frosted fingers and watched it fall apart with the exactness of a sentence punctuated correctly. They brought an ungainly piece of a story about a Lord Commander with many knives in him, written in 3 hands, smudged, lines doubled and crossed, fresh ink laid over frozen. The words would not line into a single truth. They lay abutting each other, contradictory as men in a hall with too much meat and too little fire. Sam read the letters and walked the river and learned the moods of the archmaesters, and the price of rope by the mile, and where in the city a man could find goat's hooves before the stewpots got them. He wrote to Gilly as if he had to bring her a candle with words. He told her about the way the sound in the Hightower traveled differently in storm and stillness, about the look of moths clotted on a window screen at night, about the way the river smelled different at low tide when it gave back what the boats had given it. He did not tell her about the candle. He did not tell her about the blue he had seen in it. He did not describe the way the glass sometimes answered him, not with the wall but with nearer shapes. The slope of the sandstone steps, the long brown dragon of the Honeywine, an unfamiliar man's profile, lit by green light from below, as if he were being told a secret. He did not say the word late, not once, because there are words that become smaller for being said, and others that grow too large. He fed her letters like small warm stones for her pockets in winter. He sent coin that made no apology for being Southern coin. Old Town went on being itself with the huge, contented bustle of a city that believes itself the belly of the knowledge world. There were feasts where men argued over words as if they were wine, and girls with wrapped hair who giggled at novices the way gulls laugh at fishermen. There were nights of fog when lanterns turned to cheeses in the air, and men were afraid to cross a street for fear of stepping into a boat instead. There were old men who had never seen snow and laughed at his stories until they did not laugh, and boys who had never seen a dead man and thought the dead were made by a trick until they felt the trick working on them. Then a day came that began like any other and gathered oddities like a scavenger. A Taroshi Karak limped upriver with a rent in its side like a mouth that had been slapped. The pilot cursed the current in a dialect of curses. A fisherman swore he had seen a mast out to sea shaped like a thorn in the sky, and cried blue smoke from its mouth. In the citadel, the bells tolled for a session called out of the order of things. The faithsmen hurried, and their hurry was wrong. Those accustomed to nod suddenly nodding with their whole bodies. In his chamber, Marwyn had a bag already packed, and a look like a man watching two storms meet. Euron Greyjoy plays at gods, he said. The Reach plays at gardens. The Faith plays at righteousness. Your boy plays at holding a wall with his chest. The dragons play at waking. And we, he lifted his bag, play at being late. But this time, perhaps, we will catch the corner of the cloth as it is pulled away. You're leaving? Sam said, already knowing it from the sight of the bag. To seek her. To find the thing that woke the candle, which is to say, to find the dragons who remember what fire is and what it wants. You would think the men who make a beacon would understand how light behaves. You would be wrong. He thrust a roll of parchment into Sam's hands. Keep this. Letters, for those who still listen when magic is spoken, without a joke at its end. See that the glass flows continue. If you can, steal a better candle and learn whether the green answers a different green, better than it answers a black. Ben? D? Sam clutched the roll like a staff. And if the Ironborn truly come, then the city will be reminded that water understands fire's language too. Marwyn's smile was unhandsome and fond. Don't die in a library if you can help it. It's an old joke and not worth repeating. He paused, his eyes ticking over Sam's face as if checking it against a memory. Tell the boy North that a Magus went south, because the world asked him to. And tell him that when men start to die for real, archmaesters will forget their arguments like men, forget the names of their neighbors' sons. Men of Setaro. Marwyn left in a cinnamon reek and the slap of loose canvas. The cinnamon winds painted stern stared up the river with island boldness. Sam watched until the ship became a moving piece of color that the river had accepted, and then a pale idea beyond that. The Hightower's beacon burned its unblinking eye. The day sailed over into a dusk that had too much copper in it. The first big bell in the city to turn panic honest was the beacon bell. It did not sound often. It was a large animal roused, impatient, indiscreet. 7 strokes, then a clamor like pots thrown. The Hightower's banners changed. The purple and silver arms of Hightower ran up the staff above the beacon's slit, and the white tower on its green field looked suddenly smaller than the wind. From the topmost gallery small men moved like insects tending a fire. The river. Sam had never known a river to be able to do this. Looked as if a hand had pressed it from the sea inward. The current shifted under the presses and pulled the boats wrong. Men shouted. One barge spun and kissed a wharf with a sound like a slap that made everyone around flinch as if they had been the one struck. Old Town had been sacked and spared so often in its history that it had made a deal with panic. It kept a plan in a chest by the door. The watch ran in leather that knew salt. Nobles put on their good mail and stood on balconies as if watching for rain. The faith's men lifted their 7-pointed stars and then put them down again and took up spears instead. The citadel moved like an old man remembering a dance. Ibraz's hands shook as he locked the door to a vault. Peristan argued about whether arguments were worth saving. An archmaester whose link for metals flashed at his throat insisted on seeing to the chains. Walgrave wandered in circles, asking for his cat. Sam did not feel fear in the way he remembered fear feeling. It came smaller and clearer, like a tool he could put on the table and use. He went to the rookery. He did not need anyone to tell him that whatever came from sea would be mistaken for the whole of winter by men who did not know better, and that a city under the wrong panic would forget the work it owed the world. He handled the birds with a haste that did not hurt them. He sent ravens to Eastwatch, to the Shadow Tower, to the other watch posts, stitched along the wall like black beads. He wrote, without flourish, "Ironborn sails. If the river is cut, go to Gulltown and follow the fingers north with glass. If the bite ice is early, break the ice. If the wind takes the ships you have, lash the crates on rafts and push them out and haul them in on ropes. If you have no ships, teach every child with a knife to make another knife out of black stone. Do not wait for us to be ready." The bells began to quiver the very air. The high tower's beacon flamed higher until it seemed to spear the sky and make a scream there. From the west, the sea made that loud, persuading noise that water makes when it intends to slap a man and then actually does. Sam made for the high tower because his feet wanted height. Alaris fell in beside him without being asked, bow at a trot across his back. The city foxed and folded around them. Women pushed children into cellars that had held wine once and would now hold breath. A man stood in a doorway holding a fish and a knife, undecided which was more important to throw away. A goat bleated, as if Ironborn were a thing goats had always known would come. From the tower's inner gallery, the sea showed them the truth men in the streets argued about. Ships, many Diawall. A rake of masts and sails low and dirty with old salt, figuring themselves into lines as if a man with a quill had drawn them there in a hurry. A long ship shaped like something a bad dream had learned from a shark. A great ship with a spine of carved beasts, and a horn mouthed up at the sky. Sam had never seen Dragonbinder blown, and did not see it now. He only saw the way the air quivered over that horn, and the ripple that went through the fleet as if a word had been said. Along the city's wall, men planted spears, then arrows. Then someone remembered that oil exists, and they ran for the amphorae. The beacon burned like a god being told to stand up straighter. "Archers will not stop them," Alaris said calmly, as if saying that pears will not be apples. "They will twist under the piers and come up in the alleys. Then the alleys must be made to cut," Sam said, surprising himself. He found a watch lieutenant with a face like an unkindly carved turnip, and told him without stammer or question where the alleys were narrowest and which ones sloped to the water so a net would be a wall, and how a cart turned sideways could make an Ironborn die loudly for the instruction of other Ironborn. The man listened, looked at his captain, who nodded as if he had no better idea to put in the place of this one, and went to do it. Fires began on the river, the calculation of oil and arrogance. Men cheered when the first longship kicked away from a bloom of flame, half burned and down by the stern. Men howled when a second ship, with a wolf's head on its prow, made for the pilings and bit into them as if wood had veins. Somewhere not visible, the faithsmen and the watch met newcomers, and made from their collision a noise like a roomful of pots being thrown at a wall, one at a time, and then all together. The wind carried up salt and the smell of men who have made their bodies into weapons, and then must pay. Sam thought of the candle and how far its light went. He thought of the other green. He realized, abruptly, that the glass might see through smoke in a way a man's eye could not. He left Alaras with the archers at the parapet and ran down the tower's inner stair until his lungs lit and burned and became new lungs. He found the candle in its room, and it burned as if it had not noticed a city inclining toward harm. He set his hands over it and said, "Show me the river. Show me the piers." The way a child talks to a dog he very much hopes understands him. The green lifted, deepening. The sea swam in that little height, a sea calm with menace. He learned quickly how to move his thoughts sideways to change the angle. He saw the undercoils where long ships wriggled into shadow and men's long knives knifed upward. He saw the place upriver where weed had gathered around an old submerged stone stag, and where boats now caught and twisted. He saw an alley that was not an alley as much as a dark trench between piled casks, and he saw ironborns slide down it like eels. He saw, believe it, a patch of oil that had run with no flame yet, and a man with brains enough to put flame to it in another minute. He hailed a boy. "Run to the Western Fish Market," he said. "Tell them the fifth alley from the nets will break under weight. Have them put their carts topsy there now. Now. If they wait, they will crush their own men." He turned the glass to the sea again and felt, rather than saw, the larger wrongness coming on the horizon. Not a ship, not a horn, not a man's plan. A storm. Not a clean storm, a thing ridden and made into a toy by a man who liked to show how water obeys. It would push the river backward into its mother and make the boats all think they had been turned to face the wrong way. He watched a man called his own name and knew that the only way to fix the river when a storm commands it is to stop believing the river will do otherwise. "Tie sterns," he said to no one, and then to a guard by the door, breathless. "Tell the piers to lash their boats nose to stern or they'll be spun. Do it like you have been paid to be fast." In the hours that followed, there were 3 or 5 or 10. Time did what it pleased. Sam learned another quiet. The quiet in which a city decides not to be a throat for men to slit. It was not noble. It did not sound like songs. It was the sound of a net being let down exactly right. It was the sound an oar makes when it finds its water under a clumsy hand and corrects it. It was the sound a boy makes when he refuses to run again and stands and raises the little knife in his hand, and the man in front of him, laughing with his lip maybe, falls wrong and does not get up. He did not kill anyone himself. He pulled men. He pushed barrels. He shouted where shouting added. He wrote a dozen lightning-fast notes to men whose boots he did not know and put them in the hands of boys whose hands he did. He turned the candle again and again until green swam into the corners of his eyes and stayed there, so that even when he turned away, his sight was tinted. He saw a longship find the very alley he had named and try to spill men into it and fail because the carts lay like sleeping oxen across its mouth. He saw a faithman go down with a spearhead like a toy in his cheek. He saw a Hightower bannerman fall, his gold gorget shining oddly in the green, and another man step over him with no pause. A boat caught fire. A boat did not. When the storm hit, the city had clenched. The water came in with hands, as Marwyn had predicted. The Hightower's beacon guttered once, and then found itself again as if complaining at the insult. The iron-born sails snapped into a new anger, and a few ships were driven past the harbor mouth altogether, their masters cursing in the names of drowned gods and proud kings both. The boys at the piers, bless the nameless, did what the boy Sam had hailed told them to do, and boats did not spin. The alley the candle had shown him boiled with face-down men. No faces were given back. Some part of the ironborn broke themselves on the parts of the city that had been made suddenly hard. Some part flipped away, joined their fellows, regrouped out of sight in the stutter of rain and spray. The Hightower rang its bell down to low iron. The tone men used to say, "More will come, but we will have hands ready." When the storm had had its say and turned toward the east with a contemptuous flick of its skirts, the river had a new smell, a dead and iron-laced smell, and the city tasted itself and spat once and did not cry. Sam slept afterward in a chair by the candle without meaning to. He woke to the heavy blue that comes after an old storm has turned its back and started a new day somewhere else. The candle had not guttered. It gleamed prudent green. His neck had a kink that would be a friend for days. He found his way to the parapet where Aluris had been, and found him there still, looking rested because boys were made for such repairs. The Hightower's men had painted over blood already in one place. Neat work that spoke its own parable. And the city's ordinary noises were coming back cautiously, like animals emerging after a hawk has passed. The beacon stared downriver without judgment. "Your glass is a riddle that risks answers," Aluris said without turning. The river would not have listened without it. Today, at least. Today, Sam repeated. He looked at the sea for sails and saw none in near water. A smear far off might have been canvas or cloud. He rubbed the ache in his neck and did not let himself count bodies except as numbers for the ledger that would pay for more glass. The Citadel congratulated itself with the hypocrisy of old institutions. Archmaesters said, with a delicacy that avoided saying, that some candles might be of use in unusual circumstances. Abrose authored a treatise on coastal defense that somehow did not mention glass except once, in a footnote correcting a novice spelling. Periston argued that the Ironborn's persistence proved the superiority of organized unbelief to organized piety. Men who had despised Marwyn's packed bag talked about how fortunate it was that his brand of enthusiasm had not been here to inflame foolishness. Walgrave found his cat and wept. Sam sent twice as much black to Eastwatch as he had meant to. He sent the guide for napping and binding in triplicate. He sent a letter to John that did not mention Ironborn at all, and mentioned the storm only as weather, and mentioned the candle not at all, and said instead that men with stone in their hands had not died those hours, and that if there is a God for late men, he asks for the names of lads and girls who moved a cart when someone told them and did not ask who that someone was. He sent a little coin to a watch lieutenant who had the expression of a turnip, and told him it was for new nets. He bruised his knuckles teaching a boy he was not sure he liked how to recognize the line in a flake where the next knife lives. Letters came in return. One with a thumbprint in grease and a blot where a tear had walked through its own ink said that a woman named Tala had found a box of black stones under a mare's blanket with a twist of paper in it showing the way to twist sinew, and had made 3 knives out of it and cut 3 things that called themselves men and knew better. Sam stared at the name Tala until it was only strokes. He had not written the name down himself. The boy who had copied the guides had never met him. His sister's name had made a little journey into the hands of a woman who wanted her daughter to live until her daughter had a daughter. It felt like mercy. It felt like theft. He folded the letter and placed it where he kept Gilly's. He did not know what to do with joy when it came in such forms. He tried to become the kind of man who could hold both it and its memo of debt without shaking. The candle helped, in a fashion that he did not like and could not abandon. In its green, he learned distances. He learned how not to stare and not to ask for more than the glass meant to give. He learned the particular feel of winter over the haunted forest and the different one it wore south of the shivering sea. He learned the way the Dreadfort looked at the world when no one looked at it, and how Bravest Towers made a beard in fog. Once, he made the error of trying for Dragonstone, and what came back to him was a memory of heat so thorough it nearly made him sick. He did not try Dragonstone again. Pat came to him the day after that attempt with the posture of a boy, asking forgiveness from a man he means to rob. "There's a fellow with an iron coin," he said, as if repeating something told to him rather than told by him. "Wanting to see the restricted shelves. Talks about bugs and books as if he liked them. You should keep your books close, Samwell." "Pate," Sam said, and saw upon speaking the name that it fit the boy more poorly than it had the first time. A mask settling wrong. "Thank you. I like our cats," Pate said, and put his hands behind his back, and went away. Elorus was not waiting for that story. He intercepted it on the curve of a stair, as if it were an arrow he'd loosed himself. The man with the iron coin goes everywhere that keys go. Be wary of men who have learned to dress as books. Is this riddle sphinx talk again? Sam tried to keep the bitterness out of his voice, and failed a little. "I have more than riddles to place on my scales." "You have one riddle too many," Elorus replied simply. "Gilly. The candle. You look for her even when you promise yourself you don't. Don't be angry that I understand the shape of your back when you're lying. Benderol." Sam shut his eyes and found the candled green still there as if it were now a color the world simply wore, like sky. "I will not drag her across that glass," he said, surprising himself with the fierceness of it. "She deserves to be neither spied upon nor consoled by a man who is hiding in a city where salt keeps and blood is inconvenient." "Good," Elorus said. "Then when you do drag her across, you will know that you are doing a wrong thing." He smiled, apologetic. "I like you. I like that you want to be late less than you were. I don't want liking to be how you become a liar." Bah. Not long after, A letter came without a name in the outer fold, its seal broken and resealed clumsily by watch hands who had been told to be careful and had been careful with their strength. It was in Joan's script. It was the kind of letter men write when a wall has taken the breath out of them for a day and a night, and they want to say a true thing before sleep has its lie. Knives break, but they bite. Arrows snap, but they sing first. If you can send the ones with the little serrations, the old men say they bite harder. Teach them down there to make them sing. Teach the South to be armory and leave the songs to the North. Sam copied the letter and put the copy among his proofs, like a man setting a piece of iron on a scale to clap it down. The original he read 3 times, and then put with Gillies and Talas, and the boys who had cut 3 things that called themselves men. He wrote back with the practical ungainliness of a quartermaster in a storm. More coming. More of the serrated. Marwyn is gone. The glass shows you sometimes as a shadow moving along a wall, and once as a man with his head in his hands. He did not write the last sentence. He put his seal on the letter and watched the raven take it as if he were handing part of his own breath to a thing that knew how to fly better than he ever would. He made, over weeks that had less weather in them than his life had before, a network of men who did not like each other much and would still move crates for one another. A bargeman knew that a Taroshi factor's sister had a liking for the way a certain old-town baker stacked his auburn loaves, and this meant a cart could leave the bakery with 2 extra sacks without anybody's pride being involved. A brown-haired boy at the chandlery decided, after Sam slipped him a coin that would buy his mother a better spindle, that the smell of boiled hoof would be allowed to remain in a side room near the river, where bowmen came by. Accident. A one-eyed woman who called herself Marn wore knives where her breasts should have been. She made arrowheads as if she were larding a roast, neat and vicious. Sam paid them all modestly and praised none of them extravagantly, and was as punctual as a bell each time. People will die for how I was late, he told himself. These will live for how I learned time. A small thing happened that had no right to mean so much. On the 7th day of a hot spell, when the river smelled of selkie and old leeks, a raven returned to the rookery at a time that made no timetable sense. It came at his window and not the rookery's and sat on the sill, bold as rent due. It had a thread caught about its toe. Sam removed the thread gently and unwound from it the smallest twist of parchment he had ever seen used for a letter. The script within was near as small as the parchment was rolled, and without accident. A careful hand had put it there, a person practiced in carefulness. 3 words only. Your knives sang. He did not know who had sent it. He did not want to. He put it with the other letters like men put little charms in a pocket against a winter's walk. When he next went to the candle, he did not ask to be shown the north, or Gilly, or the shape of blue along the snow. He asked for the belly of a boat in the Bay of Seals, and for the sound a crate of glass makes when men lift it wrong and then right again. He watched the slow progress of another small safety. In the nights that were not full of bells, Sam walked the seawall and learned the stars. He learned that knowledge can become a posture men take against the wind, like squaring the shoulders. He learned the names of constellations in 3 languages, and the way their shapes hid and returned as the simple wheel turned. He did not pray to them. He did not pray much. He had done enough of that in rooms where men died anyway. But sometimes his lips moved like a man who has learned a good song and forgotten that he sings as he works. When word came from the east, the kind of word that doesn't carry a seal, soiled and squinting through rumor. A dragon on a tower, a dragon holding a harbor, a dragon woman in a black castle looking out over a sea she had crossed. It came like a stone thrown into a pond already crowded with frogs. The citadel croaked itself into a frenzy and then quieted with the smoothness of an institution that has decided how to be surprised. Men who had insisted that candles would never burn accepted them, as if they had always preferred green to tallow. Archmaesters grew old shelves for new books and pruned old doctrines as if trimming a hedge. Sam did not wait for the truth in those rumors. He sent to Dragonstone not 1 letter but 4, to different hands and different types of man, those who would be touched by pay, by piety, by promise of honor, by the hunger to be necessary. He wrote out recipes for knappers and carters. He bound coin to a piece of advice about not letting boys carry the crates without older hands there to turn the rough edges. He wrote as if he could persuade the island itself to shed stone faster. He thought once about asking for leave to go north with the next convoy. He carried the thought around in his mouth like a pebble, turning it with his tongue until it was smooth. In it lived risk, and also a kind of justice. To put his body in the road between the black stones and the men, to take them, seemed to him proper. He made a list for himself of what would be required, and went to speak to Ibros and found that the Archmaester had that morning decided to need him to copy 2 treatises touching the use of boiling oil in siege, a work that would take a week, and that after that there would be a conference with a Tyrell cousin about sponsoring a new tract on hygiene in camps. He stood in Ibros's doorway with the convoy in his mouth and found waiting there the whole of his failure, shining and familiar. You will always find a reason to do your work where the air is warm. He went to the high tower instead. The beacon reached up the way a man reaches toward a shelf, always just beyond his fingertips. The Lord of the High Tower was not a man Sam could ask anything of. Lords do not recognize requests shaped like needs not their own. But the Lord Steward listened the way dry ground listens to the first rain, with caution and interest. He was a little man with a precise beard. "You need ships," he said, "and to leave Old Town without archmaesters thinking you will not come back. I need to stand in the cold with the knives I helped make," Sam said. Surprising himself with the boldness of the sentence, and then immediately, inevitably, with shame at the grandness of it. "Men die for my timing, and men live," the steward replied mildly, in that practical way of men who have seen ledgers with the right numbers at the end of the month, despite much fuss. "I will see what the High Tower can spare when the Ironborn sails are not on our horizon. You will go with monks who smell of salt and talk about patience, as if it were a fish they have learned to catch." Ben? He did not sleep again before the river tide turned for that trip. He walked the inner quay, running his hand along the old chains that had been raised in other wars to keep other men from believing the river theirs. It shamed him to leave Gilly where a letter must go before a hand could. It shamed him to leave a candle that answered his questions more obediently than any man did. But shame is not a wall. It is only weather. He put his body on the only road that led north and called the shame rain. The ship was a tub with a holy name he could not pronounce in the sisterman's dialect. The monks aboard wore brown and smelled of fish and old prayers. They liked him because he was grateful for their porridge and did not make jokes about their lentils. He liked them because they did their work without requiring that the sky admire them for it. They shipped along the coast far enough out to confound raiders and near enough in to duck into coves where the charts were only men's memories. The crates were lashed and double lashed. Sam had them unlashed and lashed again when the first squall came, to teach boys who did not like to be taught, and their faces became the faces of boys on other shores who would one day not drop a crate at the wrong time. At night, the sea wallowed like an animal with a stone in its belly. Sam stood by the rail and mapped stars onto darkness. In the black that was not candle green, he broke promises he had made himself and looked north with the eyes he had. Not the ones the glass had taught. He saw the curve of a world that kept its own counsel. He thought of John as he thought of the moon. Always there as shape and change both. Reachable every night and always beyond reach. He thought of Gilly as he thought of fireflies, being careful to love the light and not try to catch it in a jar. He dreamed once that the walker came for him on the deck in a fog, and when he tried to raise a brand, there was only wet rope in his hand. The thing did not put its hand to his brow. It put it to his chest, where a boy he had been told he was fat and slow and no sun. It was not a cruel touch. It was measuring him. When he woke, in the stink of the monk's pewterware and fried eel, he could still feel the cold's courtesy across his breastbone. He took it as a poor omen, and an honest one. Eastwatch showed itself at last like a mouth in the coast, teeth up. The smell of pine came first, that resinous, patient green, and then the shape of the wall's arm running down to the sea, where men had dared to name water theirs with stones. The men on the parapets looked smaller than Sam remembered, because he was nearer to being a man who understood the size of things. He wept despite himself, and the monk beside him pretended not to see it. Because monks who have been useful at sea are good at that particular mercy. The crates went up to the quay, and then into the hands of men who could make them sing. The distribution men had learned how to argue faster without knives. They took the tally, and only one tried to pocket an extra. Sam let it pass. The man looked hungry for something that was only a little coin and a way to feel the world had not swallowed the name in his mouth. He walked under the wall and felt its cold fall down his back like a bucket of water. It tasted different than it had before. Some part of it had eaten obsidian and learned a new word from the way the black broke in its mouth. Sam, someone said, and the name was whole to him because of the voice. He turned and could not, for a moment, speak, because John's face was the face of a man who had been built in a place where knives and words were used interchangeably for too long, and the face of a boy he had loved. Both at once. He had not known how he would greet him when the day came. He put his head down like a bull and went forward into Joan's arms. He was aware, distantly, of men who were careful about their dignity turning their backs to the embrace. Men who have faced the dead grow particular about allowing each other their little decencies. "You're thinner," John said. The old idiot thing men say to put a hand on a tender place without pressing it. "You're not," Sam said, and then laughed because it was so like something Pip would have said, and because laughter was a thing he now allowed himself to do, only when it came for him and dragged him by the throat. They talk the way men talk, who know they should be writing orders while they speak. Sam told John how the river had moved, and how the glass had seen its underwork. John told Sam how the blades had broken, and been replaced and broken again, the way an argument breaks under the pressure of a fact, and then must be made again with new words. The wind leaned on them like an impatient parent. Above, men worked with the competence of those whose small labors add up to another man being alive. Sam watched a wildling woman tie an obsidian shard to a bone handle along the pattern in his copy, and thought, with a small unhandsome satisfaction, that he had become not late for this one woman today. "I have to go to Castle Black," John said. "Eastwatch can hand the glass to the eastern woods, but the center needs it. I would have you with me, but the Citadel will not give you up. The Citadel will give me up to anyone polite enough to thank it for the chain it hasn't put around my throat yet." Sam said more sharply than he meant, "I came with the crates. I will go back with empty ropes. I will come again with more crates, and again, until the rope remembers the weight better than it remembers me." "What did Marwyn say to you?" John asked suddenly, squirreling into the heart of a matter because he could. "That I should not die in a library," Sam said. "And that glass answers glass. And that when men start to die in a way that cannot be ignored, the men who argue about words will forget they like the sound of their own sentences." Joan's mouth tucked itself into the shape he wore when a truth he disliked met another he disliked less and discovered they matched. "He is right," he said. He put his hand on Sam's shoulder, the way a commander does when there is more to say than the day can hold. "And wrong. If the library had no such men, we wouldn't be talking about how sharp to make a knife that was a rock once spat out from a mountain that remembers dragons." They clasped forearms and left themselves in each other's keeping, which is the best men who cannot keep each other can do. Sam walked the lower walk until his breath told him a story of competence he almost believed. He sent letters. He went back to the ship. He took the monks' porridge and gave them in return a story about glass and water, and the green light foolish men despise. He slept in a coil of rope and dreamed that he was digging in snow with a shovel at last. And in the dream he hit something that chimed, and awoke with his hands numb and the smell of the sea in his nose, and a pain in his chest where a thing with a hand of ice had measured him and had not yet finished its sums. Coming south, the wind was contrary. It made the monks' heads ache and turned 3 stomachs sour. It pushed clouds inland that rained on places that had expected to be dry. Sam stood with his face in it and tried to imagine the way wind writes over snow like a quill on paper, and hides footprints and then reveals them, depending on whether it wants to pretend to be kind. He did not take the candle out of his chest for that return trip. He left it on the tower like a star. He did not look at the north. He looked at the rope burns on his own hands and felt a kind of happiness at the hurt that might have been mistaken for piety. When Old Town rose again out of its own breath, he had already written 3 letters in his head and nearly wept at the thought of leaving them to coin-smudged boys to be carried by indifferent birds. The city received him like a book with a finger marking the place where he had left off. The cries at the fish market had the same vowels in them. The girl with the auburn lobes stacked them in that same peculiar manner. The Hightower stood as if it had never moved and never meant to. Pate was at the scriptorium door. "There's a man asking about the candle," he said, and Sam had to rest his hand on the doorframe to keep from jerking. "He has a way of not leaving footprints. I thought you might prefer to know." "Thank you," Sam said, and let the boy lead him to the harmless questions, which rose like midges over water and made him itch. He disliked being in the room with the glass when a man whose name he did not know stood at his back. He disliked the flash of iron in an open palm, as if a coin had been shown to his heart. He disliked the way the man's eyes were careful not to be green and the candle's green. "You are diligent," the man said, and when Sam turned, the voice was already the voice of men who had learned to speak in halls with many doors. "Neither high nor low, neither much nor little. You send knives north, you send belief with them. That is dangerous. Belief feeds men," Sam said, "and these men spend many days hungry." The man's hand closed over the coin. The two surfaces clicked, quiet. "Belief makes men whose deaths are worth more to other men. That is also dangerous. Might I see your copies of—" "No, never mind which copies. Might I see what you see when you place your hands over the flame?" "Then ciao." "Not today," Sam said. He felt his weight in his shoes. He felt the places his body chose to be when it meant to be immovable. "Today I am late for a letter." He looked over the man's shoulder and saw Alaris watching like a cat, with a bird between it and the door, and the courtesy not to pounce until it knew the bird would try to fly. "Another day," the man said, and became a scentless piece of the room, the way men trained to vanish become the furniture. Alaris's eyes followed him, until even the boy looked a little bored again. "Books in men's clothes," Alaris said with disgust. "They'll try to read you, and then put you back on the shelf the wrong way up." He tipped his head at the candle. "You did not look while you were away." "I looked at my hands," Sam said. "They told me better stories than the glass could." "And what did they say?" "That I will be late less," he said. "That I will make smaller distances between the men who cut and the men who need the cutting done." He put his palm lightly over the candle's cool side. "That when the blue is close enough to smell, I will try not to be in a room that smells of ink." He kept to it. He made circuits that other men could not be bothered to make. He walked the quays and made the rope remember its work. He improved the small matters which become large when neglected and are swallowed without thanks when attended. He wrote to Gilly about rain on the river and lips in winter. He wrote to John about the serrations and a new way to fit a black leaf to a shaft so that the break left enough of it in the wound to make the cold's hand recoil. He wrote to a woman named Marn about how she could teach her boys to look for the line in a flake. He wrote to Marwin and did not expect an answer and did not receive one, and that was right. He did not speak of the man with the coin, except to put a word in Abros's ear, that books were walking where they had no right. Abros frowned and said something mild about thieves. Pate swept the floor with a diligence that made him look like a boy trying to be forgiven. Alaris shot a rat as it ran along a beam and grinned like a chorus boy. On a morning that the rookery kept to itself for a while, because its own drama of fledglings was enough work, a raven came with a hint of ice in its wing, earlier than the season wanted. The letter had Joan's poor pen and a smear where someone had set a tankard down. The words were only 4. The economy of a man doing 3 things at once and meaning them all. "The glass is working." Sam took the letter up to the tower and read it there where the green could sit beside the handwriting without either making the other smaller. He said to the candle, out of foolishness and gratitude both, "Then make it work today and work next week and work when the storm comes again and work when my friend's body has nothing left to take from it and work for women I will not meet and children who will not say thank you because they will not know whom to thank, which is the right way for thanks to be." The glass said nothing. It burned with the dignity of a thing doing what it had always meant to do, even if men had not believed in it. Downriver a boat bumped a wharf gently, and a man shouted at it as if scolding a dog. In the fish market someone laughed with a mouthful of bread. Far away, where the world leaned, the cold wrote its neat music, and men and women wrote their answer. Between the two, late, stubborn, altering by inches everything that inches can alter, Samwell Tarly put his hands and did not move them until the shape of the day had been learned.